Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for Ohio, let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who. Wanna go, gonna glow.
Hey, it worked.
There we go. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Ohana Packers Edition podcast. We are Hope. I am Iowa Joe. That is Kawano-san. And this week we are continuing our off-season off-topic with Jpnguides.com founder Michael Zislis. Mike, as we were kind of talking earlier. Mike, it's good to have you on. Thank you for joining us over here on Hope.
I'm excited to be here. I've told you before I'm a big Broncos guy, but I'll do anything for an NFC team. I wouldn't do anything for any AFC team podcast. That would just be a no-go. But I'm excited to talk to you guys about Japan and answer all your questions and hopefully entertain everybody during this too long off season.
It is indeed a slow burn, but Mike, we want to thank you.
Yeah, and you know, we normally wouldn't have Bronco fans on here because I'm still salty about Super Bowl 32. So
8-year-old Mike has never recovered.
But yes, we are continuing our off-season off-topic episodes, and hopefully you guys have been enjoying it so far. This week we're going to talk Japan. Why I brought Kawano back on with me, because that's our resident Japanese expert. But Mike, the first question is, what does Mount Fuji smell like?
I mean, if you want to get into it, Mount Fuji just smells like air. I'd say that the biggest thing when you go to Japan is everything is so clean there. It's so nice, and especially when you go to a place like Mount Fuji, you're breathing in and it kind of breathes in deeper. And my one thing I always tell people is if you're from a dry climate, Japan is extremely humid. So when you take that breath in, it's gonna be, hydrating kind of breath. It's hot. I'm glad that I'm not there this summer.
That gives me a little bit more of an answer, because the reason I asked the question is because a couple of years ago I was looking for a deodorant, and I just was going down the deodorant aisle, and one of the smells was Mount Fuji. So obviously I contact the one guy that I know that has a little bit of experience with Japan, because I think, what was it, last year, Mike? Because it was while you were, or just before or after you got back from Japan, and I sent him the question. I said, what the hell does Mount Fuji smell like? Because I don't know if I want to get this scent or not. And he goes, I don't know. So you just gave me a better answer.
It's funny. I kind of want to say too, whenever I think about Mount Fuji, I don't know why, but the first thing I think about is there's this story about how these guys hiked up to the top of Mount Fuji, and then they proceeded to pay about $250 to have a Domino's pizza brought all the way up the hill. The delivery guy got to the base of the mountain, got up, and walked all the way up for $250. And so now I want to say I don't know, maybe Mount Fuji just smells like pizza. But depending on the day, depends on if those guys are there.
My older brother-in-law did hike it, and he was not there when the Domino's guys were there, so he cannot attest to that.
I read something recently. They're right now. It's really cold. In the winter season, you're not allowed to climb it. It's you can climb it at your own risk. And there's a guy that had to get airlifted off the mountain. He was a tourist from somewhere, and he actually went back because he lost his cell phone, and he had to get airlifted out a second time. So do it in the summer. Do it when they recommend it. Don't go in the wintertime.
Funny thing is I know people around me that would actually probably end up being that person. So, but that's interesting that you say the climate is more of a humid climate, because I'm used to that. Iowa is nothing but humidity and all that when it comes to the summer times. And as we don't get into the 110 120 degree temperatures too often. We only hit like 90s, maybe into the hundreds once in a great while, but it's always that humidity factor that kills us here. So I guess I would be kind of at home there in Japan when it came to summertime, even though I hate the heat. But you know, so Mike, what really got you into the Japan culture and wanting to be this guy that knows about Japan?
It just kind of happened organically, but it all started back when, like, in high school, I was really getting interested in, like, going to sushi restaurants. And I'm lucky I have an uncle that's like kind of like a second dad. He doesn't have kids or anything, and he loves sushi. And all the time he would be like taking me out. And as I got, like, I wouldn't like waste money or time like not eating. I would try everything. And so we would kind of like go up the level, go up the level, go up the level. And then, like, right around the end of my high schooling, he was like, "Hey, I'm going to go to Japan. If you plan this trip for me, I'll take you and you can eat at these restaurants with me." And I did it. And I went to Japan for the first time. And after that, I was just kind of hooked. Like, uh, I love American culture. I think there's a lot that's beautiful about America, but going somewhere and seeing just this homogenous culture where there's a lot of like kind of common respect going on. People are very cleanly. People are very kind. I grew up on the West Coast. It kind of reminded me of like a little bit of like down south kind of hospitality mixed with like being in somewhere like New York. And I'll just never forget the first time I got into town looking at the street and being like, I feel like I'm at like a movie set. This is all so clean. It's pretty insane. And the more I enjoyed the trip, the more I told myself I want to go back. And I ended up traveling to Japan about 10 or 13 times in the past 10 years. And then I lived there for 3. And over that time, just all my friends, every time someone's going to Japan, I'd get a message like, "Oh, hey, my friend Joe's going to Japan. Can you send him a little, itinerary of what to do?" And I was like, man, I feel like I'd be pretty foolish not to try to monetize this. And it's given me a reason to enjoy Japan more and to get more interested and, learn the language and do all that kind of stuff. It's made it so it's become not like a hobby, but something that I can really contribute to.
That's cool. I got a friend, the Green Bay guy, Ben, who did the same thing. He was always getting asked, where do I need to go to eat in Green Bay, and what do I need to, where do I need to go? And so he did the same thing a few years back, where he started a site, and now he's the go-to for people in, his website, greenbayguy.com, and all that. And so, that's really great to. That's awesome to hear that that's what got you into it. And now you can kind of tour guide it a little bit for people. What do you think is the biggest misconception about going to Japan as an American?
I'd say that the biggest misconception for me, like when I'm talking to people and I'm getting them, ready to travel, is you imagine Japan as like this neo futuristic, you know what I mean? We're right out of Blade Runner kind of thing. And I tell people it's a real mix of new and old. Like, they have to the minute trains and they have like vending machines that serve hot tea, but at the same time, they love faxes. And like, if sometimes your hotel might ask you for a fax or something like that, and you're like, I haven't used a fax machine in years. And along with that, like, it's a bit old in the sense that, it's a very extensive railway network. I don't think they're trying to keep up making it like ADA accessible and having elevators and stuff like that. So, a big thing I really tell people when they travel is really try to pack light. Like, make this your biggest mission of the trip is to pack light. And there's tons of coin laundry. All the hotels offer laundry services. And, take a little bag that you can get souvenirs at the end. But man, every time I fly into Tokyo, I'll see some tourists and they're all pushing around like 4 bags a pop. And I'm like, you guys are not going to have you're not going to have a fun trip, or you're going to spend a lot of money, having bags delivered to and fro or hiring a taxi every time you leave. So, like I said, it's very futuristic, but also, bring your walking shoes because we're going to be walking.
That's a lot of the
You can
novelty of
throw
it.
in at any time you want, Quano,
Yeah.
with anything
No, I was
you've
just
got,
gonna say I do agree with everything Mike's pointed out regarding packing accommodations at hotels. There's a lot of laundry available, and honestly, what we did when we went last year is at the end of the trip we went to one of the Don Quixotes. So it's this it's like their version of a Meijer for like the that's the like best way I can dumb it down. It's like their Target Meijer. I can easily say we have them here in Hawaii, but I don't think even California has a Don Quixote. So, but you can go there, especially if you're in Tokyo, you can go to any one of them and you can buy these like massive, I call it a duffel bag because I don't know what else to call it, but it folds up to like maybe 8 by 8 or something like that. But when you unfold the thing, it's like you can fit the size, you can fit the equivalent of like two full-size suitcases worth of clothes in it. So basically that's what we did. All the trinkets, omiyage, snacks that we brought home, we threw those in our good suitcases, and all of our dirty laundry, we're like, throw it in the Don Quixote bag and it'll just get tagged and taken home that way. So definitely agree, Mike. Yeah, it's kind of what Mike was alluding to. There's a lot of walking, a lot of train service. The one, and like Mike pointed out, one of the ADA initiatives that the bigger cities, so Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto, are all invested in is if you walk around these cities, you'll see these yellow paths, like yellow trails on the ground. And so I didn't know about JPN when we went last year, but luckily my brother-in-law has been in Japan. He's been living there from 2013, so he's been there over a decade now. So he was our de facto tour guide, and he was explaining how that yellow path, that's the ADA path, not ADA, but it's for the blind because it's a different paving method that they use on that path so that they know you're on the sidewalk, and then it has like different bumps for when you approach an intersection and things like that. So as Mike noted, they're trying to move forward with the times. They're trying to retrofit old stations with elevators and stuff, but it's a lot like walking around certain parts of Chicago and stuff like that, where you're expected to, if you want to catch the train, you've got to get up to elevation to get on the L kind of thing. It's really similar to that. So, but I know Mike will go into it further with Mike, but there's a lot of good sightseeing, a lot of good food, and it's really easy to get around these cities once you understand how the train routes and bus routes work in the cities.
So let's go ahead and just jump into that. I mean, obviously, most people are going to know Tokyo. That's the main spot for Japan. But what is the go-to that not a lot of people would know coming from a different country and visiting Japan for the first time?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go in, and this is like it's become like as I've started my company, like this has become a big main point because right now everybody's going to Japan. Nobody got to go during the pandemic, so there's all these people punching their ticket, and there's a really convenient bullet train line that will take you from Tokyo all the way like through Fuji in this town called Hakone, which is like a onsen hot spring town, and then you can take it all the way to Kyoto and then to Osaka. And people call it the golden route. I'm guilty of taking it many times, but it's this really easy trip where you can kind of visit the top 3 or 4 cities in Japan. And right now, Japan is being so over touristed, and everybody's just doing that route. So like I like right now when I'm planning trips for people, I'm like, this is your time to like try to get outside of that bubble. There's so many different towns in Japan. There's amazing food everywhere you go. And it might, like I want people to go to Japan and want to go again. So like this might be a first trip and you might not I might tell you not to go see those things that everybody's trying to see, but on your next trip, you can try to. And like cities that I always recommend to people, my first is like Sapporo up in Hokkaido. So it's like the island up to the north. I call it like a mix between Seattle and going to Alaska. In the summertime, it's really like mild weather. It's a lot more dry. In the winter, it gets very cold, but it is like seafood lovers' paradise. It's a lot cheaper than Tokyo. It's a lot newer of a city. Like Japan's like a couple thousand years old. Tokyo. It's an old place. Sapporo has only really been modernized and developed since the 1800s. So it's got a grid-like city. It's like Manhattan. They got a Central Park, they got a whole kind of like underground city when it gets cold. And it's like a 30-minute plane ride and about $50 on a little, you know what I mean? Like puddle jumper kind of airplane. And I recommend that to people because it's like a good value. It's great weather if you go in the summertime. If you like to ski, you can go skiing. And then, I mean, I'm just going to plug it. I used to live there. It's this town called Niigata, and it's about 2.5, 3 hours north of Tokyo on the bullet train. So you go all the way up, and it's on the Sea of Japan side. Like you're over near Korea and that little sea right there by China. And it's where like 60% of Japan's rice is grown. They have a lot of hot springs and onsens and traditional hotels. It's very like got a lot of nature and things like that. And you're right on the coast. Again, you're on another ocean. So the sushi's great. There's all this great food. And I always tell people this anecdote that when I was living and working, I lived in Niigata, and then I would travel to Yokohama or to Tokyo for business. And I'd be at a restaurant, and people would be like, "Where do you live?" And I'd say, "Oh, I live in Niigata." And people would literally like grab their, be like, "Oh my goodness, like that is the best place in all of Japan to live." So I've kind of now like I equate it to like living in a place like Napa or Sonoma. Like it's where everything is from. They also make a lot of Japan's sake there. So people will be like, "Oh, the sake is great. The rice is great. The sushi is great. Such a great place." And ever since I lived there, now I've been traveling more to smaller cities. And a big thing of Japan guides is to try to get you to go to one of those towns, because I've gotten to meet with tourism boards and do things where they're trying to get people to come. And their biggest thing that like deters people from going to those cities is that the golden route lets you kind of like keep traveling. So like you can go from Tokyo all the way down to Osaka, and they have an international airport there, so you could just leave. And the train to Niigata just goes there and back. And people, I feel like, are they're going to Japan for their first time. They really want bang for their buck, so they want to kind of do this itinerary that lets them kind of like start somewhere and end somewhere else and fly home without having to get back to Tokyo or Osaka. Those are where like your two international airports are. And our kind of goal is trying to get people to understand, like, it's a few hours trip at the most. Like, why don't you try to go somewhere like Akita or Yamagata, which is really fun too. It's above Niigata. There's all these really cool prefectures, and to be honest, they could really use some love at this time of their history.
Yeah, kind of to touch on
There you
what
go,
Mike was
Mike.
saying. Yeah, what Mike was touching on with Sapporo is, if you've ever gone and perused the Asian aisle at your local store and you've looked at some of like just the drinks, you're gonna see Sapporo on a lot of bottles, on a lot of food. I think the best dry ramen brand is Sapporo Ichiban. There, if you've ever seen it, it's the, oh, I think they still make it this way. The noodles are in a plastic wrapper. It's mostly white, and then the flavor is what determines the boundary on the package. So like, I think pink is shrimp, red is original, green is chicken, and brown is beef and stuff. So you've seen that, and then a whole bunch of the different drinks are Sapporo products, and then they do have like there is a Sapporo beer museum up there, so that's up there. I think a lot of Japan's potatoes are grown in Sapporo in Hokkaido, so that's a whole thing in and of itself. But yeah, and my kind of what Mike was saying, my brother-in-law he takes an annual trip up there, and he goes bar hopping basically, and he's just trying to find like little, basically, what's it called, whiskey bars, just to kind of like spend his time, just kind of, he likes to bike around and stuff, and then at night he'll go and kill time at a bar and stuff. So like Mike said, I don't even want to say they're off the beaten path, because Sapporo is a pretty big city. But as Mike's been kind of going back to, because these are places that are not of the big three hubs along the bullet train route, a lot of foreign tourists don't go there. And I'll be fully honest, when my family went last year, it was everyone except for my mom's first time in Japan. So we just hit, quote unquote, the greatest hits in the major cities. And we basically we flew into Osaka, went up to Kyoto, took the bullet train to Tokyo, and then flew back home from Tokyo. So that's what we did. But I do agree. And Don Paul, my brother-in-law, he did suggest that the next time we visit, especially if I just go or my wife and I go, we would do like a bike tour of the countryside and stuff like that. Just to, as Mike has been recommending this whole time on the pod, and really what his website does a really great job of is encouraging tourists to step outside of the sort of the comfort zone and go and hit some of these more these lightly visited tourist attractions.
Yeah,
And that's fair.
Oh, keep. I was just gonna like add to that. So you're totally right. Like
Go for
Sapporo,
it.
it's like a big dairy place. Like all your big seafood. It's kind of like a big food hub. But yeah, you really nailed it in just how like these cities aren't off the beaten path, like Hiroshima or Nagasaki or Fukuoka. They're all really big towns, but people just don't go there, and it's kind of sad. And when you meet with these people at the tourism bureau, and like I've been like shown around to like like a knife making factory in Niigata, and I got to help make a knife, and they made me like a keychain, and they were like, "Yeah, we barely get anybody that comes out here," and you're like, "This is sad." Like I want to get people to go here instead of like going to, the Super Mario thing at Universal in Osaka. Sorry,
And
Joe.
see, that would be me. No, that's fine. I was just going to say that would be me because I'm a small town guy. The town that I live in is like 900 people. So when I went up for the NFL draft, that was the most amount of people I've ever been around in my life. And that was combined over 600,000 people. That's why I love going to Green Bay, is because they're a town of 120, 160,000 people. That's a big town compared to what I'm used to. And you know, if I go somewhere, I don't want to be amongst the crowds and all that. Even though some of that stuff would be fun to see, I'd love to be in Tokyo just to say that I was in Tokyo, but that wouldn't be the part that I would enjoy more. I would enjoy more being around, you know, as some people would call them, the small town yokel, because that's what I'm used to. That's what I've grown up in. The nearest town, the nearest city to me that's the biggest is Otumwa, and that's about 26,000 people. So it's not like I'm in, these huge areas and stuff like that. So, I would love to be around the smaller areas and the smaller towns because, and we have the same thing here in the United States where you can find nice little niche areas, but it's not going to be on the main interstate. You've got to travel off the road a little bit to get to them. So that's great to hear. No, or I mean, that's good to know that there's areas like that that could use it, and that you're trying to guide people to those areas. Now, I got to say this: my Japanese knowledge come is limited to what I've learned from the Karate Kid, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, uh, the episodes of King of the Hill that Cotton went back over there. My knowledge is really limited on Japan. Now, I have listened. Like, there's one of my favorite podcasts, Our Fake History, that uh, has done episodes about Japan history and stuff like that. So, beings that my knowledge is limited, I have to ask about the one place I do know, and that's Okinawa. And obviously, that's Karate Kid, big thing there. According to the movie, it's just a small little hub that nobody, or the village that Miyagi was in was like this little hub that nobody knows. It, it so what is? Let me see if I can phrase this question right. what how realistic do they depict Japan in media?
That's a really good question. I think it's got layers and nuance to it. Number one, I feel like they do a good job in Karate Kid showing off Okinawa. I really like that they did because when you start to learn about karate, it's from Okinawa. Like, and it's the little island that's like really far away from where Japan's main island is. It's got a lot of Chinese influence. During World War II, that's where like a lot of the really, the last battles kind of went down. That's near Iwo Jima and all those places. So it's got a lot of an American influence to it. It's kind of like Japan's Hawaii, but it's a very cool place, and I really suggest people try to get down there, especially if like you're going in the wintertime. You're in the tropics. But I would say that they do a really good job. I feel like sometimes though a lot of people try to just kind of focus on like samurai or certain kind of like aspects of the culture that I feel like are a bit played out. And for me, I feel like once I started really learning about Japanese culture, like some of my favorite shows to watch are like these Japanese game shows where they'll quiz Japanese people on like certain cultural things or like little objects and old things. And they'll be like, "Do you know what this is called?" And even Japanese people don't even know what it's called. And it's like a little like incense burner that's shaped like a pig and like it's got this weird name. But like I tell people the more I learned about Japan, the more I learned the language. That was a really big thing that got me to keep going back because I would be either solo traveling or with a friend or, there for business. And as I got better and better at Japanese, I'd find myself like sitting at a bar and I'd like look and some guy would be there and he'd, say something in Japanese and I do my best to reply and kind of tell him where I'm from and they were just really fruitful conversations. And I always tell people when they do try to go, like, try to watch a documentary, like try to learn a little bit about the history and like why, what Shinto is and what's the difference between a temple and a shrine. A shrine is for Shinto and a temple is for Buddhism. But like there's all these little things that you can learn, and every time you like and when you go, you'll be able to interact with it a bit better because in Japan there's a lot of subtlety going on. There won't be kind of people like jumping out to tell you this and that. Like Japan is the kind of place where people might ignore you, but they're not doing it out of rudeness. They're just kind of doing it because they don't want to embarrass themselves. And like they'll just kind of let you do your thing. So if you do that time and effort and like you read up on Japan or like I love this show on NHK World that's on YouTube. You can find it. It's called Japanology. And they have episodes on everything from like koi fish to vending machines to remote islands. And they'll just tell you everything about Japan. And every time I go, I'm like, wow, I want to go like do this thing or find this weird vending machine. Like there's vending machines in Japan that sell alcohol, but sadly as Westerners and tourists, we can't really use them. They now require like a certain pass that you have to get through the mail and it's a whole thing. But yeah, there's just tons to learn about. And I always tell people, and that's a big part of the site. We have a blog. We're trying to tell people about little things about Japan. The more you know when you go over there, you're not going to have this kind of like surface level knowledge and be like, oh, like, I saw this samurai movie and this is my perception of Japan, or I'm really into World War II and this is my only perception of Japan. Like, as you start to learn more, you get to have more fun because it's just kind of it's that kind of place. It's not surface level, I would say.
That's really interesting. Because yeah, my knowledge is just basically what I've seen depicted in media, and then I've got a friend who's uh, it's one of his like friends, his kid or whatever, started speaking Japanese one time, and we're all like, "What the hell? How'd you?" From all the anime that the kid watched, he would read. He was learning it from the subtitles and from them talking about it, and it's like, I Okay, so that it's just interesting how people can pick up on that stuff. So I know anime is a big thing for them, and of course, the big stereotypical thing is the Godzilla movies and stuff like that. So it's really it's the stereotypical American thing where we think we know something, but we don't because all we know is from media stereotypes, and that would be my feelings over there. Is like, okay, when's the ninja gonna jump out and get me? Where, you know, where do I go? Or do we hear the alarm when Godzilla comes out of the sea or something like that? But so you kind of touched on the Shinto and the Buddhist temples and stuff like that. Are there still a lot of like the ancient like buildings in that they incorporate? Is it kind of like Europe where they incorporate some of the older stuff into more of a modern usage, or do they still retain a lot of their ancient kind of styles and ways?
That's a great question, and I know Mike will probably chime in on this too. I think this kind of the sad thing, but it's still cool about a lot of the architecture in Japan is that a lot of it's been rebuilt after World War II. It's not
Yes.
like England where there's a lot of castles that have been untouched since time immemorial. Sadly, you'll see a place that looks really old and you'll feel the oldness. And then they'll tell you they rebuilt it in 1947. Yeah, they started rebuilding it. And it's just a part of the history, and you got to have to like get over that. But at the same time, they're recreating that same building right there, right where it used to be, to the T. You would never know unless somebody told you, yeah, they had to rebuild this after the war. And that being said, you can still find stuff that looks really old, like shrines everywhere. I always tell people, like, Japan taught me that everyday spiritualism is like accessible there. Like, you'll be walking down the street, and like Michael tell you, like, you'll be walking in this Tokyo alley. It's like city everywhere, super futuristic, and then you'll just stop, and like one little place has been carved out, and it's like a little shrine, and like people have put like glasses of sake there, and there's like a little bell that you ring, and there's just a bunch of money there, and you walk up and you just like throw a coin in, and you pray like, man, I hope I can get into this ramen shop today, or like, man, I hope the Broncos squeak one out. That was back before Bo came, but yeah, I would be doing that. I'd be like, please, and like it kind of like showed me that spiritualism sometimes is just taking a moment to stop and like being thankful for what you're thankful for, and then like being like, man, like I hope this happens today, and like flip a little coin into the thing. And yeah, I'd say like even in a place like Tokyo, you'll be walking down the street and you'll look to the right or to the left, and you'll see like this little shrine, and you feel like you've just been like thrown into the movie Spirited Away. And it's one of the cool things about Japan.
Yeah, I equate it for people who have been to Europe. It's kind of like walking through Rome, where you're like modern building, modern building, modern building, and oh my goodness, there's Osaka Castle in the middle of it, kind of thing. And or even like Mike said, some of the smaller ones is like you're walking around Osaka, and you just kind of want to go off on some of the side streets, see what all the little shops and stuff are, and then you turn a corner and there's just a Shinto shrine there, and there's like there's a couple people, you'll just see them doing the very things Mike noted, like giving a little incense, giving a little prayer, doing, tossing the coin in and all that kind of stuff. So, and yeah, like that's the one note that Mike commented on that I think people from the outside don't fully take into account is a lot of the country was damaged during World War II. So there's a lot of areas where they've tried to rebuild to, just to kind of put it bluntly, to help the tourist economy, to say like, this is what, historic Edo used to look like. This is what historic Kyoto used to look like. And, they can't do it everywhere because obviously, progress is everything and they have to move forward with as time moves along. But the main tourist Osaka Castle is one of them where, from the exterior, the facade, they've restored the castle walls. They've tried to keep the exterior facades all as historically correct, quote unquote, as they can, so that you get the very like stereotypical, you're inside the castle walls, there's cherry blossom trees, there's plum trees all over the place. You can get the nice, the Instagram photo spots. Yeah, I can't even say let's Kodak that because no one does that anymore. But but then you go inside the castle and like they've just very clearly tell you we have renovated the inside because if we didn't, this thing would have collapsed under the annual foot traffic of all the tourists and the residents who go to see a lot of these historical, I'll just call them monuments at this point. So it's not so much that they don't have, and Mike did allude to it very well, that it's not that it's out of a lack of respect or anything, it's more how every one of these places has decided to try and maintain these locations to best preserve them for the future generations. You have some of the areas like the Torii Gates Walk where they have really tried to keep the architecture as true to the original work as much as and you'll legitimately see particular Torii gates that have fallen apart because the wood has just rotted out from one of the posts and they haven't gotten to like they weren't able to get to like fortifying that one or anything. And then you get to the top of that hike and there are just the like very stereotypical, or like the like you see it in anime movies and stuff where it's just a shrine that was carved out of stone and there's still the original, the kami figurines that are on the shrine, that are in the shrine and stuff. And obviously nowadays they have signs that say do not approach, do not touch anything and stuff. But you do get a mix within the three, along the golden route. You do get a mix of the truly historical, but I'd honestly say it's somewhere in the like 70-30 of like it's historical facade feel, but it's definitely been modernized, and 30% of the like they have really done all they can to keep this thing as a time capsule to when it was pre-modernization, all that kind of stuff. So like pre-Meiji restoration kind of timeline. So it's really neat. But I know that out in the province, in the more rural areas, you do see more of the like time capsule historically kept regions. And like Mike has said repeatedly, those are the ones that please go visit those shrines, go visit those temples to help those entities keep whatever monument, museum, shop, whatever, all these great Japanese food hubs that are the definition of ma and pa shop kind of things. People need to keep going to get them. And that's you're gonna find great food when you go to any one of the major cities. Japanese food, like I joked that after I went there and I told myself that I would eat things that I wouldn't eat here, because once I ate them in Japan, I'd be like, well, shit, it costs 3 times as much here and it's not half as good. So what am I doing here? But it really did make me question, why do Japanese tourists buy anything that they could get back in Japan, in Hawaii? Because it's not as good. It's cramped. It's overly crowded. The people aren't as polite, and it's so much more expensive. So long-winded way to say, like, go out, see as many of these attractions as you can. And the beat that Mike is pounding on here is to not just get trapped within the cities. Go out and see more of what Japan has to offer.
Perfect. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. I think, to your point too, like over time, everybody wants to go and see these really staple items. They want to see Osaka Castle. They want to see the Imperial Palace. They want to see like Kiyomizu-dera, which is like this big temple in Kyoto. And they're all beautiful, and I suggest everybody to go there. But I just think right now, and like I'm a big proponent of this when I'm online and giving people tips, like we're at a crux. Like right now, I saw this really sad video of all these people just packing Tokyo and some of the streets, or no, sorry, not Tokyo, Kyoto, packing some of these streets, and it looked like you couldn't even breathe. Like Joe, like you said, like you want to be in a more rural place. I agree with you. This is the last place I'd want to be. And then I see things like people like scribbling, like carving their name on pieces of bamboo, like a big bamboo tree. And I'm like, this has to stop. Like, and when I talk to people on places like Reddit or, different forums where I can chat with people, I really say, like, we as tourists have a responsibility with Japan, especially with Japan and any other country in the world. Like, we need to be thinking outside the box. We need to be thinking about, like, kind of what's called as like sustainable travel. Like, how can I go visit a place kind of like America? Like, nobody's gonna go to America and like on the thing say like, you gotta go to Green Bay, Wisconsin. Like, it's people are going to tell you to go to like Las Vegas, Los Angeles, New York City, and Chicago. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, like if you were to go to a place like Green Bay, and like if I did tours for America, I would say, hey, if you're going to America and you're going to be going there around football season and you like the NFL, Lambeau Stadium is the most famous stadium in the entire world, like the entire football world. You'd be remiss if you didn't go check it out. And like it's got this beautiful town, and the Packers are a publicly owned team. That's the only one. Like there's all this beautiful stuff. And I'd say like I try to do the same with Japan, in that sense, is like getting people to kind of realize like, hey, I don't mind if you go to New York City or go to Los Angeles, but maybe try to go to that little town, like you said, and meet that rural yokel, or get that small town feel, and really get it.
So to kind of touch back with what you were saying about the rebuilding that they do they try to use material from the period, or do they use more modern things and just and the reason I ask this is I'll preface it that we have a church in here in or the county over from us that is like one of the oldest churches in Iowa. It was like built just after they became a state or something like that, and the cemetery there has one of like a Medal of Honor winner or recipient, not winner. I guess you don't really win those things; you're a recipient. But anyway, it's been burnt or stuff so many times, but they've been able to find like old barns that are from the same time period, and they've been able to use those structures to rebuild that. Do they try to do that there, or do they just strictly go, well, we're going to take this modern stuff and just incorporate it into what's currently there?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I have two kind of examples that I would put. Like one, like Mike was talking about Osaka Castle. I recently got to go there for my first time last September. And a big theme of the museum and stuff when you go there is they show you like they're like, yo, this place didn't just get destroyed in World War II. This place has been destroyed 3 times over its history due to wars and, you know what I mean? The new shogun taking over. And then they'll show you like how they've been doing all these excavations, and they find little like architectural cues and things. And it's informed them about how they recreate the space. And I'd say like to that point, yes, they're really trying for authenticity. And then I'd say like the big second one, and I just love to talk about it, is have you guys ever heard of a place called Issei Jingu?
I
Yeah,
can't say I have.
Mike has maybe. It's like it's the holy of holies in Japan. It's like the Shinto shrine where the two gods that are related to the emperor of Japan are. It's in this town called Issei, and it's for thousands of years has had this history where there's two separate sites for the shrine, and every I think 25 or 30 years they rebuild the shrine, all completely the same. They literally have a forest somewhere like a couple hundred miles away where that's the only forest where those trees to build that temple come from, or the shrine. And it like moves this, that, and the other, and like people can't see it. You like literally there's a wall around it, and it can only be viewed by the royal family. It can only be entered by the royal family. But it's like a huge deal. And when I like watch that Japanology show, they'll like show these people like restoring pagodas and shrines and stuff like that. And man, do they go for authenticity, and do they go for original techniques and original woods, original lacquer. Like it's really quite impressive. And that's what I tell people, like on the surface when we started talking about it, like, yeah, these places have been rebuilt since World War II, but don't think for a second that anybody was kind of skimping out, because like I
Right.
said, like they're taking that Ise Jingu approach where they're like, oh, like back in the day the wood for this temple was sourced from this forest up on the hill. They're going to try to get that wood as best that they can. And yeah, like I said, that's why people will think that you're at the authentic site, and then when you're told later on, they actually rebuilt that and it was finished in 1957, you'll be like, wow, I never would have known if you told me. I would have thought it was like a couple thousand years old. I'm always shocked when
Well,
it's
that's
mine.
what I just. Yeah, I really have no idea why mine is, because we have some of the best internet in the area, and and it's all underground, so there's nothing above. But all right, where were we when I cut out?
We were just talking about like kind of going on like the authenticity of these places, and I think one last thing, like there's a place I love to recommend to people to go to Japan and like try to see. So there's this prefecture. Let me like make Japan up in the north, right before you get to Hokkaido. There's this place called it's Akita. No, yeah, I think it's in Akita, but no, I just got to look up real quick. Japanese Jesus. Japanese Jesus. It's like this crazy thing. But there's like a town up in northern Japan, and they literally believe and like have evidence and all this stuff that Jesus escaped his persecution on the cross in Bethlehem and was taken on the Silk Road all the way along until he reached Japan, and he lived out his days in northern Japan and lived to the ripe old age of 100 and had a wife and 2 kids. And
That's
it's
the
little
first
things
time I've
like
heard
that.
that one.
It's little things like that where I like that's actually like a high thing up on my list, because like I mean, wouldn't it be interesting? Like, what if they found that out to be true? I'm a healthy skeptic. I don't think anything is true unless like I actually found out. And I mean, the jury's out on where Jesus went. You know.
I don't
Yeah,
know. Dan
it's like
Brown hasn't wrote the book on that one yet, so I can't agree or disagree.
it's the little town of Shingo in Aomori. That
Aomori. That's where it is. It's in
yeah,
Aomori. Yep.
yeah. So it's just about as north as you can get on Honshu. So yeah,
Hey, if I was Japanese Jesus, I'd be doing my summers up there in northern Japan. Spare the
hey,
south.
hey, the fish is a symbol of Christianity, and
It
Japan is one of the
is.
best fisheries in the world.
And he was a carpenter, so there you go. So, and I just kind of go back to what my point was is that we kind of have the same thing here in the United States that you were kind of talking about with the tourism over there, even though ours is more done by the idiots that live around here. Where that church that I was talking about is burnt down like not completely down, but 3 or 4 times, and they've had to rebuild it a different because people will go up there and they treat it like trash. And that's the sad fact about just people in general, that they go to these places and they treat them like that. I mean, what was it a couple of years ago that somebody defaced the Liberty Bell and shit like that? So it's really sad when that happens. But uh, so one of the stereotypes that a lot of people get from Japan is the the way they work. The hard work. The joke that I always tell people is if I'm falling asleep, I believe like the Japanese do that if I'm taking a nap, that means I've worked too damn hard. So just leave me alone. So what can you speak on that type of thing about the people of Japan?
I would say that the people, having gotten to the pleasure of working in Japan, I'd say that people in Japan are very like they're to the T. They really value the rules, and like I've had people explain to me like if you've been to like a grocery store and you're checking out and you've bought all these groceries and your total is $75.79, In America, you could be like, I got $79.50. And they'd be like, cool, no problem. Get out of here. You know? In Japan, they'd actually be like, I'm sorry, you have $79.78. You need one more penny, one more yen to make this happen. And so that being said, they're really about the rules, they're really about the process. And yes, people like to work long hours there. They have this concept called karaoshi, and it means death by overwork. And I would say it kind of stems from, and like, I don't know, this speaks to a larger issue that's going on in Japan. Like, I try to keep abreast of everything. In Japan, it seems like we're at a crux where people are actually more rewarded for office presence than office performance.
Yeah.
And for a long time, we've had this perception that Japanese people are in at 7, out at 8, and you think that they're working all day. But to your point, like, they could just be spending 6 to 8 p.m. taking a nap or just sitting at their desk doing something. And they're going to be allotted as somebody that's at the office all day. So sometimes it's more about presence, things like that. And yeah, like, I don't know. I kind of feel like the United States has gotten a bit better about, like, rewarding people for the actual work that they do. And right now, Japan is in like a real crux where their economy's not doing great and they're trying to get better. And it's one of the many things that people have been calling out has been like, we got to ditch this work culture. We got to be rewarding people based off of results rather than like presence. And I remember, I loved the business that I worked at. It was great. But I remember one of the little things that always made me unsure was like, once 5 p.m. hit, it became a contest to see who could stay there longest after 5 p.m. And I was like, this ain't my ball game. I'm a results guy. I want to come in and be like, hey, I produced everything that I needed today. Here it all is. I was a graphic designer, so it'd be like, I designed all this stuff 2 hours early. I'm leaving 2 hours early. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to sit here and do stuff. And I feel like Japan has really started to get that kind of wake up call. And it's really interesting when you start to learn about like Japanese economics and Japanese business. Like, it's almost like there are two schools of thought. There's like the traditional thought, and then there's people that are trying to break the mold. And like, I feel like the people that are trying to break the mold right now are like having more wins. Like, they're not trying to have people employed for their entire lifetime. Like, they're trying to get rid of some of those things and try to be like, hey, like, Joe, if you join our company, your performance is based off, we're basing this off of your results. We're not basing this off of your tenure. We're not basing this off of how long you're here during the day and in general. We're really basing this off of how you perform. And yeah, it's interesting. There's two different schools of thought, and they're always at battle.
Yeah, that old school mentality that Mike's talking about. It's like there's a lot of Japanese stereotypes that that perpetuate and stuff, and a lot of them are more true than a lot of people would like to admit to. But like, just that old school working mentality, it's like they took the like traditional Japanese mindset that like your lifestyle is like your job is part of your lifestyle. So you're a blacksmith, you're a cook, you're a farmer, and you just do these things into perpetuity. And you pass the knowledge down onto your children so that they maintain they maintain your family's livelihood. And then in terms of their economy and business, that's where you hear so much that like Japan has like adopted so many American ideals and things like that. And that whole the karoshi that Mike was alluding to, that's sort of one of those like where Japan took all the wrong lessons from American like business work, where it's like the 9 to 5, but you put in your hours and you do all this kind of stuff. And it's like they bought in and really like doubled down on all the wrong parts of American capitalism and economy. They've created some wonderful things. Like I joke that Japan doesn't invent anything; they just make everything more efficient and smaller. You look at like eh, we'll just stick with like video game consoles, TVs, like the electronic hub of the things
Cell
that.
phones.
Yep, and Unfortunately, they're not as often made in Japan anymore, but a lot of the technological advances Japan did push out. But like Mike said, there has been a shift really within the 10 plus years my brother-in-law has been in Japan from 2013, where he says there has been a relatively seismic shift in how the workforce is managed. And like Mike said, it's not a whole top-down, full 100% coverage yet, but there is a sizable movement within enough of the economic structures. A lot of the bigger companies are moving in that direction where they are recognizing that, like, oh, we could get better production if people were more like like Mike said, it was more of a results oriented, not just who can stay in the office for 16 plus hours a day, kind of like that, like junking that attitude and getting the most out of your 8-hour workday kind of thing. So and another sector where that has been a problem is, ironically, it's one that you mentioned before, Joe, and it's the manga and anime. Like the if you really read about Japanese mangakas, the artists who draw the manga and anime as a like kind of a sequential result of that, it's a kind of a dark mark in a sense, because like the the deadline expectations, all that stuff compounds on these artists. And that's why you don't see anymore the long running, like like One Piece is one of the last ones that's like we're still making new, or a lot of these more recent ones, like like a Demon Slayer or Shokugeki no Soma, Food Wars. A lot of those are like they run for like 3 to 5 years, and the artist is like, I've told my story, and I've, on some level, I've become famous and made my money out of it, and I made it to Jump, and which is the weekly manga like publication, and it's like I've had my 5 years of hell, and my people have recognized my 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 storytelling and my artistic ability, and that's enough for me and stuff. So it doesn't just perpetuate in just the straight like stereotypical office works, that it's at all levels of the Japanese work life. And it is one of those things that Japan as a country, I do see them and hear that they are trying to break a lot of those trends and move in a more really a more healthy direction, to put it.
Yeah, I would. Sorry, just to add one more thing to that. It's really interesting to learn. Like, once I started really getting into Japan, I started being like, let me take a history class. Let me do all this like really academic learning. And one of the things that I learned about that was really fascinating is that like most of our perception of like Bushido, samurai culture, all of that kind of stuff was really like refined and honed in the years preceding World War II. Like before that, it wasn't really that big of a thing. But then, like when the Meiji Restoration happens, like in the early 1900s, like Japan starts to really ask those questions, like, what can we do to motivate the working class? And so they start to like really play up samurai culture, duty, service, doing everything over the mark and for the cause. And you would sit there as all of us Westerners from our perspective and be like, "Oh, that's just the way Japanese people are." No, that's actually just how they've been for the past 80 years. And to Mike's point, like they're trying to move away from some of those things because there were good sides to it and there are bad sides to it. And yeah, it's really fascinating to learn things like I said, like Bushido and stuff. Like there were very scarce texts about Bushido and the way of the samurai and things like that. But then you start to see in like the early 1900s up to like the 20s and 30s, everybody's starting to really refine what that is. And people, like when they point out in history classes, it's something that's used to motivate the mass to work harder. And now we've reached a point to where Japan's in an economic stagnation. You know what I mean? They're trying their best, but they're never really going above their GDP. They're kind of staying the same. So now Japan's having to kind of go back to the drawing board and be like, samurai ethics in the workplace aren't really working out.
Yeah, it really was
So
a
basically, what you're saying. Oh, I was just going to say, basically, what you're saying is it's kind of like the myth of the American dream, that the harder you work, the more you're going to advance, and the higher up, you work this many years doing this, you're going to become a billionaire in no time. And really, now people are starting to realize that that's a ton of shit. And
and not to go on a deep history course or any history class or anything, but what Mike's alluding to is, so Japan had this very long-standing closed border. We're an isolationist nation for the longest time. Not They didn't even call themselves a nation. We're just, it's the land of the samurai, and we're an isolationist. We don't want outsiders coming in, all that stuff, until Commodore Perry came into Tokyo Bay and stuff in the late 1860s, and you can read up on the history of that. And so Japan was a feudal system, right? The lords, shogun sat at the top, and then they had their samurai, and then you just had the common peasants building the bottom of the pyramid. And it was when Japan became a recognized country, served honestly with with some success and real, they did well for themselves and the allies in World War I. And it was at that point that, for not the as Mike said, not the best reasoning, Japan was like, there is no more feudal system, but at some level we are all samurai. We all have samurai spirit. And like Mike said, Bushido came about as a way to like enrich the masses and like help accelerate Japan's growth as a power, as an international power country kind of thing. And it was that way to like motivate, you know national pride and all that kind of stuff. Whereas like, you know your ancestors before, they might have just been common farmer folk, but now you all have a strong foothold in where this country is headed and stuff. And like Mike said, there's a lot of good that came out of it, but then also, that's how you get the kamikaze and stuff like that. Like, as we've seen in any country's history, too much national pride, misplaced or misgrown national pride leads to bad results. So the very basic DNA of that came in the Japan's industrial revolution in the early 1900s. And so, like Mike's kind of alluding to before, Bushido wasn't really a word. It was just like a samurai is an honorable person who serves a lord and knows right from wrong kind of thing. And then when Japan tried to become an industrial power, it's like, we're gonna weaponize this and use it, and now obviously it's a part of pop culture and stuff. But it really, that's just one of many things that Mike's website goes into it. I know he has courses, and he's willing to point as many people willing to visit Japan in the right direction on a lot of these things. But there are so many rabbit holes with Japanese culture that you can go down. That Bushido crash course that the two of us went on in the last 10 to 15 minutes, that's just one of them that we know. Like, a lot of Westerners know to some degree what Bushido is, but when you dig below the surface level, you can go down a rabbit hole that leads on for days and hours and stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting twists and turns, even within, like Mike said, the last 80 to 100 years of Japanese history.
Oh, that's perfect. Nailed it.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up here pretty quick, but I'd probably get yelled at if I didn't bring this up. So one of the big things that I know for sure is big over in Japan and a lot of the other Asian countries, and of course, it's America's game and everything like that. The Japanese are big in baseball. Now, obviously, that probably had to do a lot with post World War II type thing, but it kind of like Mike said with the industrialization and that, they really like immersed themselves into baseball culture. Is that, how do I want to ask the question? What makes it where Japan just like immerses themselves into this thing, and because like I said, over there it's not a game; it's like life or death when it comes to baseball, and you can't do this. One of my favorite movies is Mr. Baseball with Tom Selleck, and they go through all these little friggin' things about you can't spit on the field, you can't you can't charge the mound, you can't do this, you can't do that because you're going to dishonor this. What kind of goes into that process to where over here it's a game, it's a sport, you go out, play it, but over there it just seems like it's life.
Great question. I'd say
I don't know if I got my question.
there are two big reasons, like surface level, and then we'll kind of dig deeper. Like my one thing I always point out to people is like in Japan, a lot of the sport names for the sport are like the borrowed word, and it's very Japanese. Like football is called like amefto, which is like a combining of American football, and like hockey is like hockey, and soccer is soccer. Baseball is called yakyu. That's how hardcore Japanese is. They got their own name for it. And a big reason why is it precedes World War II, but in the 1920s, like in the tens, when people were having World's fairs and stuff, Babe Ruth visited Japan and did a whole thing where he like went around and met with people, and like people went around to go to Tokyo to see Babe Ruth. So like Babe Ruth left a real big mark on Japan. It made people get really passionate about baseball, and I think it's just one of those sports where it's a kind of like a skill based game, and it doesn't require like at that time a lot of like physical prowess. It's a lot about like how you play it. And I think that in over American football or sports like that, Japanese people could really excel. And now, like I was actually just telling somebody today, like whenever I try like to plan somebody a trip in Japan, if it is baseball season, I'm telling you to go to a game. And all the teams have like a college level type environment where people are talking about or cheering for their team. They have songs for each player. It's quite insane. And the concessions are really cool too. There are people that walk around. They got a beer keg on the back on the back. And they're like, "Oh, do you want a beer?" And they'll pour you a draft beer while you're sitting in the stands, so you don't miss a moment. It's quite amazing. You can get sushi, you can get ramen. It's really cool. But yeah, I would say that like baseball to them is just it's a historical artifact. It's one of the first Western sports that they really engaged with, and I feel like they just took to it. And like I said, having somebody like Babe Ruth, I mean, like that would be like having like I can't even name like a great football player. It'd be like having like Joe Theismann or somebody come to Japan and show them how to play a little bit of football. You'd be like, okay, they really got with it. And over time, the sports really like elaborated and got bigger. And now you have like kind of the likes of Shohei Ohtani and the rest. And I never knew this until I started digging into it. I'm not a huge baseball guy, but apparently there hasn't been somebody that's a pitcher and a hitter like Otani was since Babe Ruth. So it's a really kind of like, inspiring story esque kind of thing where, yeah, like they're producing players that are at a caliber that even the United States can't match. And
Yeah,
fun.
yeah, and kind of to build off what Mike said, like Ruth visiting was definitely the genesis of it, and he kind of touched on where baseball it it buys into a lot of Japanese stereotypes where like we're not the biggest, we're not the biggest, we're not the most physically imposing, people by ethnicity, we're athletic in certain the ninja and samurai genes are in all of us, but you know it's a lot of the like Japanese people are very meticulous, they're very detail oriented, they're studious of a craft and all that kind of stuff, all of those, like you have guys who train to make katanas for their whole life, and you're blacksmithing and you're folding metal for hours to make a blade kind of thing. Japanese people took that ancestral, really almost psychotic nuance of a craft, and we're going to apply it to a professional sport. And like Mike said, they've crafted the game so much that yeah, you can still the leagues are, the biggest league is NPB, the Nippon professional baseball, and so they, there is baseball, but it's yakyu. Like yakyu is the one that's going to get you in the door, and the the game looks the same. It's relatively played the same, but like it was really when like Ichiro came over to the States that like it really opened the door on like how different the game is played, where it's like they don't have, forget the steroid era, they just don't have guys until like Otani who are like 6'4", 2 something, who can crank 30 homers a game. The game is built on playing, quote unquote old school baseball with the short game, bunting, moving runners over, all that kind of stuff. And like when Daisuke Matsuzaka came to the Red Sox, one of the big things that was always controversial is like his pitch count is always astronomical. What's he doing? He won't get. But like in Japan, they don't care as much about pitch counts. Like whereas in the U.S., it's like, oh my god, he's at 100 pitches or he's near it. Get him out of the game, kind of thing. In Japan, it's like, no, you're setting up a pitch for a pitch for a pitch in the third at bat kind of thing. And in the States, it's like you never want to get to a 3-2 count. You don't want to get, you don't want to get past 2 balls to a hitter. In Japan, it's like every pitch is to set up the next pitch, and the 3-2 count is like this revered thing by pitchers, because it's like they almost look at it as such a challenge that it's like it's almost fun to them to get to a 3-2 count, because it's like, what am I going to do at my peak to challenge him at his peak, kind of thing and stuff. So it's to say that baseball really captured the imagination of the whole country. And it didn't have to work that hard, because one of the jokes is that Japanese people smoke because Americans smoke. Like that's one of those ones that Japanese picked up from the States and all. But baseball, like Mike said, is the one sport where the Japanese looked at it and were like, we can do that. And they've spent the last 100 years in their own way perfecting how to play the game. And you do see it where the one international league that has relatively regularly sent players who can compete on the MLB level is the Japan League. And you see some guys from Korea come through every once in a while. You'll see a Chinese player or like an Indian player, but it's the Japan League. And then obviously the Mexico, Cuba, those are all feeders in their own right, but those guys are getting groomed in the major league farm systems after a
They
certain
bring
point.
those guys
Yeah.
in completely
Whereas
different.
the Japanese guys are professionals in their own right, and they're coming over in their mid-20s kind of thing. So unfortunately, I did not get to go to a game when we were on our trip, but it is something that I do definitely want to hit up the next time I go. It's like Mike said, I've heard so many great things about what the experience is like, and yeah, as someone who did play baseball in Little League and whose son is playing T-ball now, it is definitely something that I want to go and experience the next time I get to visit.
Yeah, it's super fun. One last little thing to your point about like the meticulousness. I watched this whole documentary. There's a Japanology on baseball. It's great. And one of the things they talk about, like, they're not about the guy that hits the grand slam. They love the dude that makes the sacrificial bunt that makes the whole win happen. And like you'll see all these stories of people, and like it's way less flashy. It's more about the meticulous nature of how the game works. And it's a big reason why personally, like I like the NFL, because I know all the rules. The MLB, I don't know the rules. Like I didn't even know until a few years ago that depending on which stadium you're at, if you're in an NL stadium or an AL stadium, the rules are different. Like baseball has got wild historical complexities to it that like feel like really speak to the Japanese soul. And like when you go there, they have this like really raucous environment. Like they're cheering on players, like they're singing their college fight song when they come up to bat. And like for me, I'll tell you guys, I'm going to be open. I'm a Yokohama Bay Stars fan. And it's because I got to go to a game and I stood in like the all fan section and I was like near the band. They have people that bring like their own trumpets and drums and flags, and they're singing songs, and like everybody's got beers. And I was like, this is like a college level environment turned up to 100. So I always tell people like go to one game and you're going to leave Japan being like, wow, I'm a big Hanshin Tigers fan, like because I went to a game in Osaka. Like you're gonna go see one game and leave and be like, that's my team. I'm rooting for them whenever I see them on the news or something like that. It's really cool.
That's great. I mean, I'm a big baseball fan. I love football. Obviously, I'm more of a football fan because obviously we have the podcast and it's a football-based podcast. but I've always been a baseball fan, and like Mike said, I played through Little League and a lot of that stuff too, and so that would be one of the things I would love more than anything is to see how they do it. Now, I think I would be a little bit more confused with it because I do know more of the Major League Baseball rules and I would be going over thinking, okay, well, why aren't you doing this? Why are you doing this instead of this? Why you should be hitting away, not bunting over. What the hell? Come on. So it would be really interesting to see that stuff.
In Japan,
But
the big thing is like the enthusiasm does not stop, and you'd think that it would stop because it's baseball, but literally every time the opposing team comes on there, or no, sorry, the home team comes up to bat, they're singing a song. They're singing a song the whole time the guy goes, and then they go oh, and then the guy tries to hit it, and everybody's quiet for a second, and then once they're back, the band's playing and everybody's going, and you're just sitting there going like, this is insane. Like, this is a game that's normally like really slow, like when you watch it in the States, but they're like, there's not a moment where you're not like, clapping and singing some song. And it's fun. Like I said before, if you learn Japanese and you learn a couple of phrases, like I'm to the point now to where I can like turn to somebody and ask them like, what are we singing here? And they'll be like, oh, it's this. And like, they're like giving me a flag and like, they're getting me to get into the game. And I feel like Japan's, to kind of end it, Japan's one of those places that really rewards you the more you learn about it, and like the more phrases and like words that you can get into your lexicon, like you'll all of a sudden just feel like you're one of the guys. And that's why I'm a big Yokohama Bay Stars fan. I wish I could love the Hanshin Tigers or Osaka's team. It's like the Red Sox of Japan. Everybody loves them. That's like a foreigner. But like I went to one game and I sat with all the fans and I sang all the songs and I had a great time, and now I'm a fan of that team. That's kind of how it works.
that's great. Kawano, you got anything else you want to throw in there real quick? All right, Mike, it was great to have you on here. This was a really great conversation. I didn't know how it was going to go because, like I said, my knowledge is very limited on things. Again, that's why I brought Kawano back with me. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you, what you're about, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, so my site's called jpnguides.com. Very simple, JPNGUIDES. And we're just all about making people custom itineraries for Japan. So if you guys came and you're like, hey, we're real big Green Bay Packers fans, but we want to see Japan, this, that, and the other, I learn about, the kind of essence of what you guys want to do. And then I create a custom PDF, or I can get it printed for you. But it's like a 100 plus page guidebook that's built for your trip. So like if you're staying at a weird hotel in some place, kind of far away, I'm going to tell you everything about that station that's closest to you so you can get into town. And anybody can find me. It's free for like a consultation call if you want to sit down and talk about your trip. And guides start from around $250. And I feel like it's a great added value to your trip because I'm taking out all of that guesswork. You're not getting lost. A big thing I tell people is like, you could accidentally spend $200 taking a taxi from Narita Airport to Tokyo. It's very easy. It's like very far away. It's about a 2-hour trip, but it's still Tokyo's airport. So I'm trying to get people like to not make those classic tourist faux pas. I'll help you get reservations. I'll do all of that. And it's in like a PDF guidebook. So I let you kind of take the lead and get outside of your box. But then I give you like a little framework where these are the kinds of places you want to go. Maybe I have a lot of people that are interested in watches. And I'm like, hey, this is the neighborhood where you want to go check out vintage watches. It's like having a guidebook that you don't have to skim through the entire thing. It's literally made for you. So, yeah, if anybody's interested, yeah, just hit me up. Tell me you're from the podcast or you're a listener, and happy to give you guys a little deal for it because I'm always happy to help people explore Japan.
There you go, Kawano. There's your next trip. You don't need the brother-in-law. All right, guys. That was so. thank you very much again for being on. It was great to have you on. Be sure to check out his website, Jpnguides.com. You can find our website, which is ohanapackers.org. We got Carlos is pumping out articles by the minute, it seems like, anymore. Check those out. Find past episodes of our podcast and Brian's podcast. Make sure you go over to the merch store. Buy something. Help support the show. Make it so I can send Kawano over to Japan one of these times. But yeah, go over there. You can find us at Ohana Packers Edition on Instagram, Facebook, at Ohana_Packers on the Elon Machine. I'm Iowa Joe over on Blue Sky. Kawano is on Blue Sky and Twitter as Kawano Mike. As Mike, you want to go ahead and give your final say? I've been stealing it for the last couple of shows.
No, that's good. Just one time, go pack go and aloha.
Green Bay hustle, grind it up. Hit the field, we don't bluff. Touchdown dances, feel the love. Jordan's got that MVP stuff. It's time for the up. Let's go. Packers bringing that show. It's time for you know who. Gonna go, gonna glow.